Hello and welcome to another episode of the Revenue Revolution, sponsored by Jointflows. Today we're joined by Kevin McIntyre, Chief Revenue Officer at Dealfront. How are you? Welcome to the show.
I'm doing well. How are you? Pleasure to be here.
Very good, thank you. Very good. Great to have you here. I've gone through your background, and I've got to say there's going to be a lot of good talking points because you've got a very impressive CV up until now. So congratulations on that. But give our listeners a little bit of a flavor in terms of who Kevin is and how you've got to where you have today.
Sure. And again, thanks for the opportunity to be here, and thanks for Jointflows for sponsoring the discussion. So as you mentioned, Kevin McIntyre, Chief Revenue Officer at Dealfront. I am a first-time Chief Revenue Officer, so this is my first foray stepping into being accountable and responsible for the comprehensive go-to-market motion for my employer, Dealfront. Dealfront, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the organization, and it wouldn't surprise me if you're not, given that it's relatively new. So Dealfront is a new brand of the combined merger of Leadfeeder and EchoBot midway through 2022. So we're about a year and a half into this journey, and I joined the organization shortly after the merger. So on one side, you have Leadfeeder, who are focused on giving companies insight into their website visitors to power marketing and sales engagement, and EchoBot focused on sales intelligence with B2B data for company and contact information to empower sales and marketing teams to find, identify, and win their next customer. So as a combined platform, we are working to empower sales and marketing professionals to better hone in on your ideal customer, engage in the appropriate way with the right levels of insight, and win your next best customer. So as you might be able to tell from my accent, I'm an American. I know this is probably a predominantly European audience. My wife and I relocated from Boston to northern Italy in a town called Turin, or Torino in Italian, at the very beginning of 2022, and we've been thriving there and working for the organization. So that's kind of where I am now, and I'll let you kind of guide the conversation or questions around anything else about my past.
Awesome, great introduction. How you liking Italy?
Love the food. Don't like the bureaucracy. But look, I mean, there's good and bad things about any country, right? And it's just about approaching everything kind of with eyes wide open and embracing the experience. I love the country. My wife and I have Italian heritage within both of our families, so it's a really great opportunity for us and our family.
Amazing. All right, so let's jump straight into it. As you rightly pointed out, first time CRO over at Dealfront, a couple of impressive stints as a VP of sales and GTM prior to that as well. And I think what's interesting is you've gone through almost what many would have deemed to be a bull market, where it was, at times you were just signing deals for, without as much effort as you probably would now, to be in CRO at probably what's more of a challenging time now. What do you think are, if we start at the CRO level to begin with, what do you think are some of those key changes and therefore challenges off the back of that you're experiencing, and how are you trying to overcome them?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think first and foremost, like my profile of CRO, I'm much more of an operator. I consider myself a little bit more of an architect than just first and foremost a sales leader. Yes, of course, the sales component of the CRO role is absolutely critical, but it doesn't command just the majority of my attention, right? There's plenty of amazing out and out sales leaders and professionals on my team that can be relied upon to do that work. So I think that the first lesson for me coming into this was just ensuring that you have the right pieces in place and you have the right team members within those teams to facilitate the comprehensive go-to-market motion from interacting with the brand, to qualifying that demand and fit, to putting yourself in a position to earn the right to ask for the business and earn that business, and then drive that positive customer engagement and success through onboarding, adoption, and hopefully getting to a point where you can maintain and grow that revenue. And then, of course, all of the supporting roles underneath foundationally, whether that's revenue operations, revenue enablement, and other functions. And so having this comprehensive view of the whole revenue engine has been a lot of fun. It has been a lot of work, particularly given what Dealfront, among probably everybody tuning in and listening, have like what we've gone through over the last couple years. And you look back at other roles that I've had, mostly focused on just kind of the growth elements of things, and are we hitting target, and are we building pipeline, and are we retaining customers, and not so much focus on how we're acquiring that euro of recurring revenue, assuming most people are in a recurring revenue business. So the efficiency element of it has been much more top of mind than maybe I thought coming into the role, right? And you get excited about, hey, we're going to have 30, 40, 50% year over year growth ambitions. And you start getting really excited about how we're scaling the funnel, how we're scaling our customer facing teams, driving improvement to retention, and quickly realize, just given the pressure and the changing landscape of B2B SaaS, there's a command on, are you acquiring and maintaining revenue in a sustainable manner? And so looking at important efficiency metrics, whether it's CAC payback, LTV to CAC ratios, you're looking at certain capacity metrics per AE, and are you able to improve the number of discovery calls they can do each week, or the number of wins they're closing each month, and so on, and just having that constant eye on those improvements, because at the end of the day, not every euro of one business is the same. It's not a euro is a euro is a euro, and certainly depending on the complexity of your go-to-market motion, some revenue motions and streams are more attractive and therefore sustainable than others. I'll pause there. I realize that was a mouthful.
No, that's really good, and that's the exact conversations a lot of sales leaders are having. Obviously, it's about, there's been a shift between the revenue needs to come from here, and this is the ratio of each revenue pot, to almost complete fluidity. Okay, well, it doesn't really matter as long as I hit the bottom line target. The revenue could come from expansion as much as it could come from new logo. What I'm finding is that the machine powering the revenue is not as fluid as where the revenue can come from, and it's not as quick to change direction as, you know, perhaps the trends that you're seeing in your client base. Like, from an operational viewpoint, like, how do you manage that, Kevin? Trying to have something that has versatility, you know, in the motion, basically, and being able to adapt to those changes.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I still think we're figuring it out a bit, but I feel that we've made a lot of strides, particularly in recent months. And so if you consider that the organization I represent, Dealfront, again, which is the product of a merger of relatively two equals in terms of revenue, number of people, but very different go-to-market motions. And Leadfeeder on one side for our business was predominantly PLG driven, right? And you engage users through entering a trial. We have a sales layer to that to help them kind of navigate that trial experience, augment kind of the value that they're receiving from the product, and then earning the right to win a long-term subscription, or users have the ability to continue in kind of a light or free mode. There's also an outbound element layered onto that, and going after more kind of ICP, kind of specific target accounts that we know where we could get higher ARPAs and customers that would retain longer. Then on the EchoBot side, more traditional sales intelligence, similar to companies out there like a ZoomInfo, a Cognism, Apollo, Lusha playing in that space. Much more SLG nature, much more kind of traditional, especially when you look at an inbound funnel of demo requests and going through your discovery call demo. Perhaps there's a trial if it makes sense for that engagement, but very, very different. So when you start considering also that certain use cases may have different applicability for different geographical markets, then it starts getting increasingly complex. So when I look at the comprehensive go-to-market for our business specifically, and we embrace a land and expand approach, we're acquiring new customers in the way that they want to engage with us for the problem that we can solve. And that could be anchored in something that starts with web visitor identification, or something that starts with, I need to better understand my target market, hone in on the right types of accounts for engagement. We have this covered through SLG, PLG, inbound, outbound, different geographical engagements. So the complexity of managing that has been our greatest challenge. And it really allows RevOps to shine. And I think what a lot of people have this misinterpretation that RevOps is just the tools and systems and reporting folks, right? And that's an element of what they do. Don't get me wrong, and it's critical that that is right. But from my perspective, anything that relates to improving your go-to-market motions, improving your revenue engine, and how you get your average sales cycle to improve by 10%, or your win rate go up, or a conversion rate from a product qualified lead to a sales qualified lead, or MQL to a qualified opportunity, or shortening in sales engagement for a particular sales stage. And particularly through the lens that I started the conversation with more of a focus on efficiency and sustainable revenue growth, where do we see that within these different motions? So what we've been able to do with that complex kind of front end of new customer acquisition is break down each of these go-to-market motions by type, by team, and ensure that we can allocate all of the costs appropriately through our marketing costs, sales development costs, just direct sales costs, and make sure that we're able to not only look at the performance, but also understand the efficiency across this, and are we acquiring revenue at a sustainable pace? So on the front end, that's been something that hasn't been trivial to get to a point where we can look at that in real time.
For sure. Very smart, Kevin. Just for the audience benefit, PLG, SLG, can you just give the
absolutely. And I apologize if I'm throwing around acronyms that we're not all familiar with. So SLG, sales-led growth, for those of us who have been in B2B SaaS tech software space for more than kind of 10 or 15 years, that's probably what you're used to. A sales opportunity that is being driven by a customer-facing professional, where you're either engaging with inbound demand, whether that's coming from a demo request or other forums or channels that your business might be using, or from targeted outbound engagement. But the salesperson is driving that qualification and experience, and determining whether you have product fit for that prospect's needs and requirements, and then putting yourself in a position where you've earned the right to ask for that for the business. Now, PLG is product-led growth, and letting the product drive that experience, where you don't necessarily have to interact with a human in order to validate if the product or service is a fit for what you provide. And oftentimes there's a trial component. Sometimes you can use the product indefinitely. And I think what a lot of PLG teams are starting to learn and evolve is how to layer sales on top of that as well, and how to have kind of a hybrid motion where the product is still king in driving that experience, but sometimes that added professionalism of a human kind of guiding that experience, asking the right questions, helping the product shine in light of requirements, can be a really important motion for some companies.
Yeah, and you know the question I have for you is, there's a hybrid, right? And I think the hybrid can be one way or the other. So you start PLG and then you finish SLG. So essentially you do a free trial that is kind of inbound, and then the user onboards itself, and then it goes into the sales team to then develop the opportunity. And I see a lot more companies nowadays doing the other way around, which is a sales motion leading to a free trial that then leads to gated features and so on and so forth. So from your experience, what would the right approach be, and what's the most complex to implement?
I think there's not a unified answer to that, because I do think it depends on your solution. And I know the depends answer is always kind of seems like a cop out. But there are some products that aren't necessarily going to lend itself well to a user-driven experience where you might not need, let me say this a different way. Not all products are going to be easy for a user to go in, start utilizing it, and understand the value right away. Right. And I can't imagine, and if this exists, shame on me for not understanding it, but like an ERP solution, right? Like PLG for an ERP solution, I think would be like a very challenging thing to navigate. But something like Lead Feeder within our business, being able to install a website tracker to start seeing your website traffic right away and identifying these IP addresses, so you have instant visibility to companies who are visiting your website and key insights around that. Like, that's something that's in your face right away and you can start to consume. And if you have a product that can be intuitive and can drive that amazing experience, like, you're letting the product shine, right? Like that is a really, really good thing. And I've heard before in other forums and from other thought leaders in PLG, and if for whatever reason, if your business attempts a PLG strategy for your solution, and if you aren't successful with it, whatever that reason might be, at the end of the day, you probably just have a product that delivers a better experience and is more intuitive, and you can continue with an SLG motion with hopefully just a better product. I think PLG is becoming more and more trendy, is not the right word, but I think just more prominent, right? And across a lot of B2B SaaS companies, because it has this kind of promise of lower costs, right? And perhaps you don't need quite as robust of a sales team or all of these humans to support your go-to-market engine. But just putting a product out there is not necessarily going to be enough, right? And like, you're just not going to achieve all this amazing efficiency just because you've adopted a PLG motion. So I don't really know if I answered your question specifically, but there's not a one size fits all. I think depending on where your organization is on its journey, trying to figure out if PLG makes sense based on the type of product you have, and is the funnel instrumented for it, and are you able to capture the right metrics and data points to understand that customer journey, is really, really critical.
Yeah, I think there's always, it's a little bit dreamy, right? You're like, oh, it's gonna create a product, put it on the internet, people will come in, sign up, use it, and then give me a few pounds a month, and then I'll be king of the world. But it's actually really hard.
I'll give an example where this didn't work, and I hope I'm not going to offend any former employers here.
Yeah.
But a number of years ago, I spent a lot of time at IBM, and I think no one could argue that a lot of IBM's cloud strategy was behind where Amazon, Google, and Microsoft Azure were, particularly 5 to 10 years ago. Especially when you look at like things around like cloud data services and like database as a service, machine learning, like runtimes as a service, storage, and things like that. And IBM had a wonderful heritage of more traditional software-based approach, particularly for the enterprise. And moving into kind of a cloud-first approach some of the products were taking traditional software and just moving it to the cloud and providing like a free trial experience towards it. But that product was not built from the ground up to be a cloud first, kind of self-service first product, right? As opposed to where Amazon had started, they didn't have that like technical debt, right? They could get started right away with cloud native, cloud first technology that was designed for that self-service kind of discover, try, buy experience. And that was a struggle. I mean, if anybody has seen IBM stock price in the news recently, they've turned the business around quite well with a focus on hybrid cloud, among other things. But that was a painful experience where an organization as prominent and as just as reputable as IBM struggled with this. And I saw firsthand how an organization trying to embrace PLG struggled because it wasn't designed that way or fit for purpose. And it's a good lesson for me and hopefully for others, needing to understand kind of product market fit and what that user experience is based on what you have.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've said a lot of interesting things in the last couple of questions. And one of the points that really stuck out to me is if we take a step back and think about it from the lens of like an individual contributor who's trying to sign some deals, and then that manager, that individual's manager as well, and so forth. You have all of these different motions in most software companies now that are trying to bring prospects to the table. You've got PLG moving into SLG, you've got pure SLG, you've got inbound, you've got outbound partnerships. There's all these different things that you can lean on to.
That was something I failed to mention. I also partnership.
Not a problem.
Thank you for calling me out. We have that
too. There you go. So the thing that strikes me is now you can't afford a misstep in your selling process because often it's very, very competitive. And then you align that now with the fact that all of these different motions usually represent a different type of customer profile, which usually means that the process is going to be somewhat different between these prospects too. Now, what's the best way, in your opinion, of either A, setting your team up to success to ensure they're not making those missteps based on who these companies are, or ensuring that the team that you have coverage in knowledge in terms of being able to successfully navigate those pathways? So I know it's a bit of a long question. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I've always believed that focus helps drive execution. And when you look at, in our case, selling a platform where we can address multiple use cases for multiple personas, and there's different ways for an end user to experience our platform, our products, our data, aligning our customer professionals to those very specific motions is important to us. And what we do not have is just one new business selling team that engages with everything. And when you look at how I mentioned earlier, how we have our different go-to-market motions like very clearly understood and itemized, and how we measure pipeline creation, sales and customer activity engagement, revenue attainment against goals, how we're looking at the efficiency metrics behind that. We have teams aligned to each of those as well. There's not just one giant team, and based on the type of customer, what gets routed to you, you have to figure out how to engage with somebody who's come in through a trial, but also you have a set of accounts where you're engaging in good old-fashioned kind of sales prospecting, hopefully kind of intent-driven and signal-based, of course, but also something that may have been assigned to you from a demo request for a different product, right? I think a sales professional can't scale if they're trying to cover all of that. So we're very specific in terms of where we have our customer-facing professionals deployed and the type of demand they're engaging. To counter that, though, you can't always get it right. And it just because somebody engages with your brand in a certain way doesn't mean that after you start having conversations, that thing where they may have clicked is exactly what they can or should be buying. You start
Yeah.
asking some questions, you better understand what they're trying to achieve, where they're struggling, and perhaps you have something else that solves that problem. And I'm also a big believer that you shouldn't be like doing deal handoffs and passing things around and, oh, it wasn't a good fit for this sales professional because they're really focused on this, so let's go hand it off. That's a shitty buying experience.
Absolutely.
And it just puts you in a worse position. So we have to ensure that our teams are educated and knowledgeable enough, and they're able to tap in some subject matter expertise as well if they need that assistance to provide continuity in that experience. So that becomes really critical for us as well. And then on the flip side of that, because I don't want to ignore the customer teams, right? Just because, especially right now, we're all seeing net revenue retention numbers drop kind of year over year.
Yeah.
And having kind of the customer base be your growth engine is such an important thing to get right. So we do something similar with our customer teams too. And based on, again, because this isn't going to be applicable to everybody, because I represent selling a platform-based approach, there's multiple use cases that can be solved and addressed. We have our customer success teams aligned by those use cases. So they're more knowledgeable around what that particular customer persona is trying to achieve. And so we can deliver that positive experience along with the product, of course. But for organizations that have kind of a single application, a single use case that you're driving, you might not have to embrace that much complexity. But if you've earned the right at a certain level of scale where you can have almost an inbound focused team, or you perhaps have a hybrid team that's maybe a little bit of inbound and outbound, but asking everybody to do everything at once, I think can be challenging, unless of course you're just getting started and you have a 3 to 5 person sales team. But where you can have focus, I think that's key.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, God, Mick.
Sorry, I think that's my turn.
See, we're both super keen over here to get questions out to you.
Kevin, I'm sensing you've got an operational background, so the answer might be affected by by your background. But we often have the question around who's making the calls internally. Is it RevOps? Is it commercial leadership? And there's always a little bit of like a protective mindset around, well, that's my number, so I get to call the shots. And then RevOps is like, well, okay, but I'm the one dealing with the system, so actually I'm the one calling the shot. In your operations, in your experience, what's the best way to make sure that these two departments work well together?
It's a good question, and I think I guess it also depends what types of decisions you're talking about, because I think you can look at decisions, generally speaking, I think in kind of 3 different layers. You have larger strategic decisions that I think, like it's hard to define strategic, but I think you're looking at things that are more long-term, more pervasive, probably drives progression at least kind of 12 months out, and it kind of drives where you should be focused as a business. Then, of course, there's more kind of tactical decisions that help ensure that you're aligned and navigating against some of these strategic decisions and anchor points. And then there's operational day-to-day things. So I guess in context of your question, kind of what layer are you focused on?
Yeah, I would do like strategic to tactical. And I guess for the audience, it's really about, you've got strategic tooling and then you've got tactical tooling. And our audience spread across those two buckets. So strategic would be transformational changes, like, I don't know, maybe a new CRM or something that is significant. And tactical would be, your other kind of tools that are less of an investment in some sense.
Sure. So at least how we work here, and what I just like to see more broadly, is that you have strategic decisions that those decisions have to lie, I think, generally with your executive leadership team, your board, your investors, to ensure that everybody's aligned to the direction of how your organization is going to deliver value to the market, the types of customers you're going to win, and how you want the company to evolve. And hopefully there's ways that it's not just completely tops down and you're embracing feedback from your customers, from people who are engaging with clients each and every day, and you have your own feedback loops. But those strategic overarching decisions for the business need I think generally to be confirmed that way, so there's alignment across comprehensive organization. Now, specifically within a revenue department, when we look at tactical decisions that help us align to achieve certain goals, and whether that's a revenue outcome, whether it's a certain metric, whether it's customer composition, we have a number of different ways that we can go about this. I'd like to say we do a pretty good job of rallying ourselves around defined projects and initiatives, and where we can look at a particular problem or goal and align some organizational structure around that, and having accountability set with a few folks who are driving the progress, making sure we have defined outcome, we have a set of actions that have dates and owners. Just like we embrace Asana, I think that's something that really helps us in making sure that you have the right asynchronous communication set up as well, so not everything necessarily has to be a meeting. But the project-oriented work for us helps. What's a key component to that is, of course, the RevOps muscle, right? And making sure that we're being as data-driven as we can be, that if there's something we want to test or something that we want to try new, that if we don't necessarily have the data for it to make a clear decision, at least we know what the leading indicators are for it, and ensure that this is something that can be measured and that we're instrumented in the right way, that we can see that progress day to day, week to week, month to month. But typically for any new initiative that we have that's tied to a decision or an outcome that we want to achieve, the RevOps engagement there is absolutely critical. Does that help kind of get you in the direction you want with that question?
Yeah, that's exact. I mean, that's the answer I was not looking for, but I was trying to get is, RevOps is becoming so big. There's so many consolidation projects happening. There's been so many overselling done, like in the past. Oh, you should do that. You could do that. Of course, this is gonna work. And now people are regretting that decision. So it's finding the right balance, and like you're probably selling to leadership, commercial leadership as much as operational leadership. So you're obviously thinking about this yourself.
Yeah, and I encourage teams to ensure, and I said this already, but I'll repeat it again. RevOps is not just your systems and tools folks. Yes, of course, whatever your CRM is, whatever your core tech stack is, that needs to work, it needs to be effective, and your team needs to be able to utilize it to support their day-to-day activity. But the more valuable side to RevOps is the insight and the input onto how we run a better business, is probably the simplest way that I can state it. And that our VP of RevOps is essentially my right-hand person, right? And it's a source of validation for decisions, for questions, engaged in almost any kind of strategic or tactical kind of decision or initiative that we have. Because if it's infused across your revenue mission in the right way, and again, they're not just in a hole kind of off in the corner somewhere, just managing your tech stack, but they understand your comprehensive sales process, right? They know what the sales team is doing. They know how we're engaging in the market. They have full command of kind of the revenue architecture and the bow tie, right? Like they're going to be able to help us make better decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And our RevOps friends and listeners will love you because you've been speaking so highly of them, which rightfully you should be. And And to your point, RevOps are now included within the decision-making process of most companies when they onboard software, which probably wasn't the case, 5 years ago or so. Speak a little bit about the relationship between a CRO and RevOps. So usually when people are selling into a company, and it's going to be orientated around revenue in some way, the chief revenue officer is typically involved. And what you see from most salespeople traditionally is, right, we got to get that buy-in over there from the CRO. So we're going to try and sell as close to this as we can. And then, as you mentioned, RevOps starts to get involved as well. So the two of you work very closely together. But talk a little bit about the nature of that relationship. Who develops the initiatives that you're coming up with internally? Who then drives that forward? And equally, if it's something that's been you've been a prospect in this case instead, then how that looks as well. Is that a case of, the CRO should typically take first pass on it if it's appetizing, or, do you just send it off to RevOps first to validate specific elements?
Good question. So at least in my experience and how I have a really good setup with where I am right now, and maybe not all organizations have this, but if I'm doing my job correctly and understanding that you have the right team in place and you have the right individuals in these teams, you have the right management system in place, that the organization is working efficiently and effectively towards your outcomes, and they have what they need to be empowered within their role to achieve these goals, you should be able to identify gaps where that's not working, right? So I can certainly recall certain, one thing we're actually looking at right now, and I think this is a good example. I feel that like our forecasting is not as good as it could be, right? And I think many organizations probably experience something similar, and unless you're all forecasting experts out there, we can have relatively fast sales cycles. I think roughly a third of our business can close within a month, and about 2/3 of our business closes within 3 months. So we run very much a monthly cadence, right? But you can't run a business only focused on the current month. You just can't. It's way too short-sighted. You can't get ahead of potential challenges a couple months down the road. So a current thing that we're working on now is how to build out this better go-to-market forecasting methodology where we understand leading indicators of like early stage pipeline development, of work that we're doing with marketing, and what that might mean for what pipeline we'll have 2-3 months from now, even if it doesn't exist in any system yet, right? And I, again, talked at length about the complexity of our different go-to-market motions. So this is a challenging thing for us to get right. And talked about this with our VP of RevOps, and we're out there seeing potentially if there's a tool or solution that can help do that, or we're out there learning, and perhaps it's something we can just build and orchestrate ourselves, just with our own internal tooling and what we already have. So it's a gap that I know exists. Having a very clear conversation, make sure just like I'm not off in left field or just missing something, and making sure that we're aligned on the same page. And then it becomes an initiative for RevOps to dig into and explore what options are out there. Is this something we could do better ourselves? Is this something that a vendor can help with? So at least with that point, it's making sure we're on the same page for what the challenge needs to be, that there is alignment, and then trying to find the right types of solutions that could address that. So I guess if you flip that around and somebody might be trying to sell something that's going to impact a CRO and correspondingly RevOps, making sure that there is that alignment, because I'd be very, very surprised if a RevOps person in isolation is going to make a decision that isn't confirmed or blessed by a CRO or similar role, depending on how that organization is structured. Now, there might be situations where a RevOps leader is completely empowered to make a decision on his or her own. That may exist, But my instinct is there's going to be that relationship. There's going to be conversations happening that you're not aware of. And if you are single threaded through selling into the RevOps team and you haven't asked, is this a priority for your CRO? Is this a priority for your CSO? Does anybody else need to be seeing this from your executive team? How is this decision made? You're probably not uncovering everything that you need to in that buying journey.
Absolutely.
Could be a CMO as well, because I think if RevOps, again, I think if instrumented correctly, should be servicing both marketing and sales, and that's why we're talking revenue operations and not sales ops and marketing ops.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. So look, Kevin, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Very, very insightful for our listeners. We are just about out of time, but we do have a wrap-up question. The question is, through your whole career to date, and as I said right at the beginning, very impressive. So I'm sure this is going to be quite hard to answer, but you never know. What is your best memory and why?
Oh, that's a good one. You know, my best memory was at, well, I hope that I will have, out of respect for my current employer, that I will top this memory and have an amazing one that I can speak to in a future podcast. But we're building towards that memory. Now, the most fun that I've had was when I initially joined, what is now a competitor to us to some degree, ZoomInfo. So I joined ZoomInfo late 2018. And was brought in to help kind of reshape their go-to-market motion, looking after like revenue enablement, revenue operations, and then just kind of this go-to-market architect type role, working for the then CEO, and getting to go into a fast-moving business that was growing incredibly quickly, getting to work with that team to help bring a little bit more structure, repeatability, continuity to the go-to-market motion. And then within 6 months, acquired by Discover.org, and then subsequently kind of rebranded as ZoomInfo, and kind of being a part of this fast-moving organization, being empowered to work with new people to help kind of shape that go-to-market engine, and then seeing that get kind of brought into a much larger thing that has just taken off, right? And I think when I was there, we were just over kind of 150 ACV, and now like Henry Schuck and team over there are doing over $1 billion in revenue every year. And just having played a small part of that is just something I'm proud of and is a good memory for me. But looking forward to doing similar things at Dealfront.
There you go, Kevin, the unicorn maker. From 150 grand to
no. You take it back. Take it back.
Awesome.
Way too
Kevin,
much credit.
It's been an absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for providing all the insight that you have. I'm sure our listeners are going to love it. Thank you very much to all of our listeners as well. Until next time, this has been a Revenue Revolution podcast. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Kevin.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thank you.